lawyers.
And kept the water a lot cleaner.
Yes.
I mean, let's remember that part too,
yes,
right?
Exactly. And, you know, Malia, may I just quickly
Sure.
point out here that, you know, I understand tourism is our #1 industry here in Hawaii. Tourists don't come to Hawaii and travel these thousands of miles and spend these thousands of dollars to come visit Hawaii's fabulous casinos. We don't have any. They don't come for our gorgeous amusement parks. We don't have any. People come here because of our beautiful natural environment. And it is disappointing that Honolulu refused to come into compliance with the Clean Water Act when that's our #1 industry. This is something that's just not good for the environment. It is good for our own personal financial interest. And it just took so disappointingly long for the city and county of Honolulu to come into compliance with federal law.
Now tell me about this $10 million. I understand it went to law firms that were not even in Hawaii, is that right?
That's correct. The city government hired a big mainland-based law firm. It did hire a couple of local law firms, but the bulk of that $10 million in legal fees went to the mainland, to hire mainland lawyers. So we shipped so much of our taxpayer resources off to the mainland, when I think we really should have been using those same taxpayer resources to fix our problem and bring the city and county of Honolulu into compliance with the federal Clean Water Act. And I was disappointed in it as a city councilman. Now as a congressman, I'm glad the city is coming into compliance. It just took a lot. It took too long and it was very much too expensive for the taxpayers.
So, you know, Senator Inouye has been quoted as saying something to the effect that $1 billion to fix the sewage system is going to break our
bankrupt the city.
Bankrupt the city. And now we have this rail.
Yes.
And you have to deal with federal funding for rail.
Yes.
Is there going to be federal funding for rail?
Well, is there going to be federal funding for rail?
For our rail, I guess. I mean, we keep hearing different sides of the story, and you know, we haven't really seen the
honest answer is I don't know. The Federal Transit Administration is moving forward. They did, I guess, finally submit the EIS to the governor. As of this stage right now, there's no clear federal commitment in terms of funding.
Because we're talking about a $5.5 billion project, right?
Yes, that's correct, of which the federal government is supposed to be funding $1.5 billion for it. Has the city seen, well, the city has gotten some funding, but this funding I don't want to make trivialize. It has been in the tens of millions of dollars. But that's a drop in the bucket compared to the billions of dollars to which the city needs. That has not been committed. Right now, I don't know, and I don't think anybody knows for certain as to whether or not and how much the city might get for that rail project.
And so far, with all the tens of millions of dollars that we've gotten, has one piece of the rail been bought?
Oh, nope. Not a single one.
It all goes to consultants, right?
And it is interesting that we have let out tens of millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars worth of contracts. So we have a lot of people on retainer, but nobody has done anything. Not a single drop of concrete has gone into actually constructing this rail system yet. So everybody here in Honolulu, hold on to your wallet and hold on to your purses, because I think there's unfortunately a lot more to come on this one.
Definitely. Okay, now you've been in the news a lot lately for the Jones Act.
Yeah.
Tell me about that issue.
Sure. And
actually, maybe you can explain it to people what the Jones Act is.
Yes. Actually, Malia, if I could touch on two things real quickly. And the first off is being in the news a lot. You know, I think it's important to be an open, accessible member of Congress. I think it's important to be out there and to be in the public and to be a zealous advocate for the people of Hawaii to the nation. And that's why for me it's very important to get out there and advocate Hawaii's cause, and that's the type of congressman I want to be. And so that's why I'm happy to do that. Now, specifically to your question regarding the Jones Act, for those who are not familiar with the Jones Act, it is an anachronistic law. It was something that was passed 90 years ago, 40 years before Hawaii ever became a state. It is a requirement that any shipping from one American port to another American port be by and only by an American-built ship crewed by an American crew with an American-flagged vessel. That probably or maybe makes sense for shipping, say, in the Great Lakes, or say shipping up and down the Mississippi River. But when the Jones Act was originally written, Hawaii wasn't even a state. It even wouldn't become a state for over a quarter century more. Today, in the modern 21st century, it doesn't make sense, and it doesn't make sense for Hawaii. You see, Hawaii, unlike the other 49 states in our union, we get all of our goods via shipping. The other 49 states in the nation at least have the option of rail or trucking to get their goods. And so even if the Jones Act does apply to them, there is some reasonable level of competition with other modes of transportation. And unless we're going to build a new super highway from California to Hawaii, or build a gigantic rail system from Hawaii to the mainland, shipping is going to be the only way we're going to get our goods. it doesn't make sense. This law has, I think, caused prices to increase for the people of Hawaii. It is one of the many reasons why Hawaii has such a high cost of living. And it is defended by, very aggressively, by a narrow special interest. For myself as a member of the U.S. Congress, whenever I have to choose between a special interest and the people's general interest, I'm always going to side with the people. And that's why I am been very outspoken in reforming this legislation. And I'm excited that since my election to the U.S. Congress, and I think by being an open and outspoken member of Hawaii's congressional delegation, I'm very happy and very proud. We've gotten a lot of attention on this measure.
Right, national attention.
Yes,
right.
yes. The Washington Post did an editorial on this relatively recently because of my advocacy on this. The former presidential nominee, U.S. Senator John McCain, introduced legislation exactly on this to reform this legislation. Hawaii, we've been talking about this issue not for years, but for decades. But only now we finally brought this to national attention. I think are generating some interest in this, and I'm
nobody paid
hopeful.
Attention to the Jones Act before.
Yes,
nobody cared,
and
right?
I'm excited now that we have an opportunity to really make some bold reforms and changes.
Right, because you introduced an exemption for Hawaii to
That's
the Jones
correct.
Act. And then Senator McCain went and said, let's just get rid of the whole law.
Yes, yes, yes,
to get a little bit further.
That's right.
So do you think it's going to be possible with because for people that don't really know that much about the law, it's backed by the unions and the shippers.
Yes.
And right now they give a lot of money to lawmakers who help them keep it in place.
Yes,
We've done studies on that. And so is it even possible, do you think, to break up the Jones Act? Because explain what it's doing in the Gulf right now. What's happening with the Gulf?
Yes, yes. Now, what you're talking about here, Malia, about because there's a very narrow special interest that aggressively defends this measure because their union benefits directly from it or the particular company directly benefits from it. But that's a classic example of what's wrong in Washington, D.C., that the special interests dominate over the interest of the general public. And I think that's why we need to change things. And now, talking about your question regarding what's happening in the Gulf, the Jones Act actually is, interestingly, one of the things that I think is hampering things in the Gulf. What's happening here is that for foreign vessels to come in, they have to comply with the Jones Act, which means they need become an American flag vessel, and they have to be an American vessel, or they need to seek a waiver. Now, I will acknowledge there are some foreign vessels there. There are some vessels that have gone in, applied for a waiver, and received it. But I think the bigger problem is there's far more foreign companies who want to come into the Gulf and help, but have just thrown their hands up and said, why in the world would I want to go out, hire an attorney, go through the bureaucratic hassles, fill out all the paperwork just to help out in the Gulf? It doesn't make sense. I think a far more prudent policy is that we should accept help from anywhere and from anyone to deal with this major ecological disaster in the Gulf. And if that help happens to come from the Netherlands or comes from Norway or comes from Canada, we should be willing to accept this. We need to clean up this mess, we need to stop the leak, and we need to hold BP accountable. And I think waiving the Jones Act is a step in the right direction to do exactly that.
All right, can you believe we're already out of time? That was amazing. You're right on to the second. Thanks for joining us today. We'll have Congressman Djou back again, and we thank him to come for his brief time while he's back in Hawaii to come and join us today. Thank you very much for joining us on News Behind the News. Aloha.